Welcome back to Post Projects and Project 818 SRX. So we've got the engine in. Next up is the transmission. Now I could just slap the 5-speed in there, but we're still in the middle of the winter and I've got time. And I've got this 6-speed that I'm either going to run right away or add mid-season when I blow up a 5-speed. But now's the time to get all the fitment stuff worked out, so that if I do need to swap them, it's an afternoon or a day's worth of work as opposed to ordering parts and whatnot. So before I bolt this up to the engine, I've got to convert my 6-speed to 2-wheel drive. Now, in this application, it's rear-wheel drive, but as far as Subarus are concerned, I'm converting it to front-wheel drive. So I'm getting rid of the rear output, and it's just going to run the front diff, which is way down here. So these are the output shafts, or where the axles connect. Now, there's a few different 6-speeds. As far as 818 is concerned, you can kind of use any of them, but you've got to, they all convert differently. As far as supported by Factory 5, the 06 and 07s are the only ones. This is an 07. And they do supply a part that's bolt on. You pull all this stuff out, you bolt on a piece, and it's front wheel drive. However, that's $300 US for a little machined piece. Now I get it that spline pieces are harder to machine, and I'm sure that cost reflects the effort to make the part. However, $300 US plus a little shipping, converted, is well over $500 Canadian. That's a third of what I paid for this transmission. So I'm going to go ahead and do it another way, which involves a little more disassembly and some welding. Now, I won't take credit for that. I'm going off the Factory 5 forums, a member by the name of Hobby Racer, and I'm kind of just following his step-by-step, and I might take it a little step further, but I'll get into that after. For now, it's just a quick disassembly, and then we'll figure out what parts we got to weld. This little shaft actually has a really pain in the ass roll pin in it that I already removed. There is a electrical connection to the center diff. This is the DCCD center diff. The Spec B, Legacy Spec B 6-speeds, like the JDM ones, those are a viscous center diff. But these DCCDs have an electrical connection, and then partway through 2007, Subaru stopped having a oil. They stopped having an oil pump inside, and they just use a splash style system like the 5-speed uses. There's no issues with that. No one's having a problem with that. However, they do have this little drip tray thing, which I'm going to have to reuse. But we can get rid of this whole tail shaft, and I won't be using any of that. Hoping this is easy to get off. That just pulled off nicely. I think that gets reused. And here's our electrical connection. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I absolutely despise all electrical connectors. You always look at them in an awkward position, and you can't figure out which way they're supposed to go and where you got to press. Sometimes it's not obvious where you've got to press, just like in this case. I really feel like that should have been easier. When converting this to front-wheel drive, you basically just want to lock this shaft with, so this shaft here, which I believe is the pinion shaft going to the front diff, with this, which is the main shaft. And essentially we just want to make a little coupler so that we can connect those two. And left to disassemble on the tail housing is this gear here. Not exactly sure what it does, but we don't need it anymore. I think it just transfers to the tail shaft gear. Yeah, that would make sense. That's putting your rear output up into the tail shaft. So we no longer have a tail shaft, so we won't be needing this. Okay, we can put that to the side until we start zip disking. Now for the center diff. We do need a part from this, or rather 2 parts from this, I guess. Before I get into the locking part, this race right here for the tail shaft, you should probably remove, otherwise it could fall out with vibrations. It's in there pretty good, but if it did work its way out, it would just bounce around in here, could get jammed up, could get filings, could be bad. So these are the 2 parts that you need out of the center differential. If you have the legacy style, the VLSD, the one that uses fluid versus clutches, these pieces look differently, so I would suggest you look on the Factory 5 forums. I'll try to remember to link the thread in the description. Now, Factory 5 sells a piece that simply bolts onto this, and then you put it down there, and she's good to go. I'm going to be using that, but I'm going to use this for my splines for the front pinion shaft. So I will be cutting all of this excess off, because as you can see, when I put it down here, it hits these bolts, but I want it to go down lower. But if I put it the other way, it goes down too low, in which case I could space it, but essentially I just need to be able to tack it, and then I can remove all those bits after. So that goes on there, and then this one here goes on there. And what I'll do is I'll tack this in a couple of spots. Make sure you put your ground in here so it's not like going through the transmission. So I'll tack this in a few spots, pull it off, weld it all the way around this on the bench, remove this flange off the end, and then that'll fit down a little bit lower. And then there's no splines in the top, say 3/4 of an inch of this, so I might just cut that off so that it locks down nice and low, and then I'll get into how we're going to lock it. I was about to cut off the top part of this spacer as the first 3/4 of an inch doesn't have any splines on the inside, so it's not doing anything to add to the locking. And I wanted to use, or I was going to use, this shaft collar, just like on the Factory 5 forums. Hobby Racer John is his name. I actually looked up the thread today. So he used this and it locked on right in here, and then he ground some little flat spots into this shaft for these set screws, and then he added 2 set screws, and I did the same, so that there's 3 set screws on there to really keep this from coming out. However, because he used the Legacy 6-speed, which the adapter ends up looking very differently, he's not able to do what I'm going to do. And it just occurred to me that it's the better way to go. Just use this as the locking ring. Why add another piece? And there's actually 2 holes that are already drilled into this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use a smaller set screw, so I won't need the flat spots, because it'll actually, they line up perfectly with a spline, and the set screw should dig into that spline pretty good. And then I won't need to use this piece at all. Waste of $5, big deal. And it'll just be a complete one-piece design. And then I'll end up probably cutting the shaft right here, just because this end of the shaft won't be needed. Before I get into cutting up the tail housing, I do want to briefly mention this. So this is the oil pump drive gear. Now, I have no idea why it was on my transmission, because my transmission doesn't have an oil pump. I think at some point in 2006, or maybe it was 2000, I think in 2006 at some point, Subaru stopped having an oil pump inside, and they just went through the splash style with those little plastic like drip trays, just like the 5-speed uses. And I don't think they ever went back to the pump, as far as I know. But if you have the pump, it's great. It's useful if you want to put a cooler on there. You just tap into the lines on the outside, and the easy way to tell is a hard line going on the driver's side of the case. And that's the oil line that you would tap into for your pump. But you need to reuse this oil pump drive gear. It's located right next to the main shaft. So you need to make sure that you reincorporate this into your adapter. I believe there's provisions to do it if you get the Factory 5 piece. Certainly it's something that could get welded in and get added in fairly easily, but you don't want to forget it. So if you have that hard line on the side, or if you have that drive gear just inside this rear cover, then you want to make sure that you reinstall that. I'm guessing for spacing reasons they just kept using this in the through 2007. They made big changes to the gearbox in 2008, and they just didn't drop this initially. I'm sure it's not on the newer transmissions. So Factory 5 has you cut this thing 4.5 inches from here, which basically leaves this, and everything this way gets cut off. But then they just give you a little piece of aluminum that you're supposed to silicone in there as like a plug, and that's fine and dandy. It does the trick. Not everyone has the ability to weld aluminum. I do, so I'm going to cut a whole bunch more because I can. So I'm actually going to cut it right at this line here and get rid of these nubs. Cut these all off, all the way around, and then I'll finish it up on a I'll finish it up on the belt sander. clean it all up, and then I'll make a plate to cap it all off. I did just tape up. I didn't want to take off the reverse lockout or pull the bushing and needle bearing for the shifter, so I'm just going to tape those up. They'll be fine for the welding I got to do. I just don't want to get filings in there, so I just taped them up. I am going to just use an angle grinder because I use an angle grinder for everything, but a bandsaw would probably be ideal. If you can jig it up into a bandsaw and slice it down, would be the nicest, cleanest way to do it. So I've got this all cleaned up and I'm ready to start welding. I'm going to weld everything from the inside first. I got it laid flat, so I'll tack it. It is going to want to lift a little bit. Those pieces, they're in there kind of loose, so I might have to tack it on one end and push it down a little bit and then tack the other end. But I want to get them all tacked so they're sitting flat, fill all the holes, do all the welding from the inside, and then I'll flip it, clean it really good, and then do all the outside welding last. I just find that the welding on the inside is going to push a lot of the contaminants to the outside that's in the material, and it's going to be easier to get at it with a grinder and clean it, or even just a brush. It's just a lot easier to clean it on the outside. So that's just how I like to do it. I'll tack it quickly, and then I'll probably heat it up with a torch, and then I use just a wire brush. If you're doing any aluminum or any stainless, get a brush and dedicate it to that material. So like this one says aluminum only on it, so that you're not ever getting cross-contamination, because that will give you dirty welds. So I finally got this welded up, and oh my god, I forgot how much of a pain in the ass old dirty cast aluminum can be. Wow, just, you can never get it clean enough, and the contaminants are in the material, and you clean it, you weld it, goes to shit, you grind it off, you weld it again, goes to shit. So I did have everything welded from the inside. And then I welded the outside. I did leak test it, and I used WD-40 for a leak test, and it's been on there for quite a while now. The rag is dry. I'll let it drip out there now. So I did, where'd the rectangle go? So the little rectangle piece was here, and then there was 2 holes here and 2 holes here. I welded those to grind flush. And that was a real pain because you can get it to weld and be solid, but then as soon as you grind it flush, you revealed some pinholes because of the old crappy material. Eventually I managed to get it. And then these, I didn't bother trying to get that. I wanted to leave a little meat on there. But yeah, I need to clean it up real good, especially with the reverse lockout here. And then there's also this little ball right here. So I need to clean those, and where the shifter, where the shifting shaft. Anyway, where that passes through, I need to clean all that out, make sure there's no aluminum filings anywhere that's going to get into the transmission. And once they're all cleaned up, then I can install. Now I did, before I put on these caps, I did test fit it and marked my main shaft on the transmission. It did need to be cut down. It wouldn't need to be cut down if you did it factory 5's way. But I had no issue in cutting it down. Now, the shaft is hollow and oil does go through that. So I made a point of stuffing shop towel down in there, cutting it across, and then pulling the shop towel out to make sure there's no shavings or anything got in there. So I'll do some cleaning up and then I can do a final install. So I got a little Permatex Ultra Black on there. Before I put the cover on, this would be where the gear is if you have an oil-driven one, if you have a transmission with an oil pump, the gear would be right here. This one doesn't, so the oil drains out of a hole right here, and then it had some plastic trays, and then it dripped onto a rear gear that was fixed into the housing right here. And then that gear tied into this shaft, and that's what transferred to the rear. So the oil would drip on that, and then there was a little tiny tray behind that gear that would feed oil into this shaft. This shaft is hollow. So I could have cut the shaft down lower, but I actually wanted it to stay fairly close to the back casing because the oil is going to slosh along the back and it's going to get in here. Oil level will probably end up being up here somewhere anyway, but the closer it is to the back casing, the closer, or the more oil is going to just pass onto this and get in there. So there's 2 dowel pins. And just like that. So I'll bolt this up, and then part of me really wants to clean the transmission, and the other part of me wants to just get going on this install and start up the engine. So I'm probably, that's a longer one. I'm probably going to do a quick cleanup on it, but not to the extent of being able to paint it. I really liked having the 5-speed painted, but again, I don't want to I don't want to spend too much time on it because it's going to be a waste when there could be, I don't know this transmission, it's not proven. I'd rather just at another time clean it up. And there's pretty good access in the back of the car that the guy could clean it up really good. Not necessarily paint it, but get it cleaned up really good in the car. The clutch that's on there is the one I used on the 5-speed. It's basically a WRX clutch. From my understanding, it will work with this transmission. So the STI clutches don't really work with the 5MTs because the diameter is like 10 millimeter larger and it interferes with the case. But on the but vice versa is okay. So it's a slightly smaller diameter clutch, slightly less overall torque. I think that one's good for the spec stage 3 6-puck is good for I think 410 or 420 foot-pounds for the WRX and like 525 for the STI. I guess that's just in that diameter, or perhaps there's different materials involved. But either way, 4 10 foot-pounds should be plenty for me, at least for now. And for this setup, I don't think I'll make anywhere near that this summer on pump fuel. So, all right, let me get this cleaned up, and I'm going to snip off a few wires that I don't need. Stuff like this for the, I'll leave this as the plug, but this is for the center diff controller. There's a few others. I'll have to keep the, I'm not using the neutral safety switch, but I am using the reverse switch, but I'll leave the neutral safety shift wires intact in case I have a use for them later. Well, there we have it. I've got my Subaru STI 6MT, converted to two-wheel drive, and now made it to the 13B and bolted into the 818. The transmission is a snug fit with the frame. I do have a seriously lowered transmission mount because in the 5-speed, the angle that Factory 5 set it up is just messed up, and for oiling it's just torching 5 speeds. So you want to lower the transmission as much as possible. It's not as much of an issue with the 6MT, just because all the gears are in the front case, unlike the 5-speed has 5th on the back outside of the case. But it is still not the way Subaru had it mounted. So the lower transmission mount is still a plus. So I'm using the same transmission mount. It sits nice and flush. The oil pan on the trans sits slightly below the frame, but keep in mind that's the tapered frame where the diffuser mounts. So it's nowhere near the bottom of the car, and it's right at the axle center, so it's not a place where I expect to bottom out. So short of doing off-roading and going over some big boulders, there's no way that'll get hit. I will have to cut out just a little spot in my diffuser to clear that. I've also still got to figure out axles and hubs. Guys are running STI axles and then STI hubs, and that's my my backup go-to. I have the STI axles. I'm going to actually try to modify these hubs to use the STI axles. If it turns out to be a waste of time, then I'll just buy the STI hubs. Not a big deal. But before I get into that, I'm going to fully dress the motor, get all the wiring, get the turbo, the rest of the intake, everything on the motor ready to fire it up, because I want to fire up the motor. I want to get the coolant system bled, get the oil system primed, check timing, make sure that the motor is solid, and then for the rest of the winter I can fiddle with the little things like getting my axles and whatnot set up. So I weighed the transmission. Initially it was 192 pounds. It's now 163. So I was able to shave about 30 pounds off the transmission by removing that center diff, that tail shaft, a few other things there, and shortening the housing. So that was a big help. However, I also weighed my 5MT, and that one is 104 pounds. So I'm still 60 pounds heavier than the 5-speed, and that's 60 pounds pretty much all behind the rear axle, which isn't great. So I think I'll probably hang on to, I was thinking about selling that 5-speed, but I think I'll hang on to it. I'll probably continue on with the 6-speed. However, once the engine is tuned and broken in, and the rest of the car is shook down, depending on where my power is at, I might try going back to the 5-speed, see if that STI RA 5-speed we'll handle the power, we'll see what kind of power output we got, and what that equates to on track, shaving 60 pounds off the back of the car, and how that affects balance. So I might just hang on to that just for experimental reasons. Ultimately, if I do want to pursue this motor further and get into E85 setup and push some serious horsepower, then the 6MT is the only way to go. However, without really pushing this car at all, I have no idea what kind of horsepower I'm going to want it to be, and where my limit's going to be for just being able to put the power to the ground and use it on track. So lots of learning left to do, but I'm really excited. I'm making great progress. I'm not sure when you guys will see this video, but this is towards the end of January, and the engine is built, the 6-speed is in, and we still got a couple of months left before I'll be able to drive the car. So, well, probably a few months. So I'm pretty stoked. I'm gonna keep plugging away at it. If you like what I'm doing, hit the like button, subscribe. As always, leave some feedback. And until next time, peace.